you do have your own thing now, don't you? Your own like clubhouse.
Yeah, I have the clubhouse, but I'm not doing any of that there. I mean, the YouTube channel is for the songs. The clubhouse is for the hang. And the other day, I did my first live stream on that, and they thought I might get about 30 people on it that had joined the clubhouse, but a ton of people have joined, and I ended up with like 175 people on the stream.
Congratulations.
And man, it was insane then that the chat window was like scrolling so fast. And next time I'm going to put the thing that slows the chat window down. But I love the interaction with people and, you know, all the questions and people talking about stuff. I figure I'll leave the YouTube channel for all the music and stuff, and I'll use the clubhouse for other things. And then I've got another level on that where it's a one-on-one FaceTime or Skype. And I did like 15 people the other day, and we had a ball. I mean, you know, I just spent the day talking to all these people like for 15 minutes each, and they were playing me songs of theirs, seeing what I thought, and it's cool. It's you know, you got to somehow figure out how to get through this insanity that we're all going through right now, and you can either sit home and wallow in self-pity, or you figure out, you know, I still want to be interacting and viable and making music. So I'm doing all kinds of different projects and stuff. And, you know, we got to do what we got to do.
I agree entirely. I have a similar thing that I do where we call it an academy and we teach. But my main ulterior motive for it is to sort of, I don't know about you. I don't know what you were like as a child, but most of us as musicians weren't particularly sporty. I don't know about you. And the sports I like were like cricket, which isn't exactly aggressive. You know what I mean? And so I wasn't really in danger of getting any girls through my sporting activities, you know. And I, you know, I love music. So now we get to like have these little mini communities where we get to hang out with a whole bunch of guys and girls like us.
I think it's great. You know, I'm really excited about this. And every day, you know, I'm thinking of different things I can do and add to everything just to keep it up. But it's so sweet that my favorite thing is, man, when I finally pack it in at night, I'm really an insomniac. So I'm up really late and I'm up really early. But I lay there and read the day's comments on the videos. And it's just so sweet how many people, you know, talk about, man, this is saving my life, you know, having this during this terrible period. And people are sending me pictures of the family sitting at dinner watching the videos on TV and stuff.
Oh, it's beautiful.
It's like, I just wanted to put up a couple of videos showing some bass parts, and it just took on a life of its own.
You know, lots of people do this, and lots of other successful people have done this. But I think my humble opinion is like, there's no BS with you. It's just, you're just completely honest. And that's what makes people connect. I mean, obviously, you're incredibly talented and you're working with some of the finest artists in the world. I mean, the straightforward thing is, you know, I've been a Facebook friend of yours for many, I don't know, a good decade. And you're just honest about how you feel and think about things, from the music to everything. And that's, I think, comes through.
I hope so. I mean, I'm just trying to be me. Gotta be me.
So what I did last week when we first started talking about doing this, as I decided, I know, of course, all of the huge albums you played on, but I have to be honest, I never listened to the section solo stuff. So I went back and listened to it, and I thought it would be quite kind of fun because it gives a bit of background. Because now, of course, you have the Immediate Family, which, for those people that don't understand, that is the coolest name of a band ever.
It's Cooch's. Cooch's came up with that.
And it also doesn't speak to ego as well. It speaks to humility of like, yeah, we're like the Immediate Family. Here's the famous ones. And we're like, I like it. It's really, really cool. And Cooch is such a great guy. I got to interview him last year, and
he's the best. I mean, all the guys. I mean, for me, the real fun part of it is when we're together. You know, I'm sitting here looking at guys I've been with for 50 years, and we all still dig each other. And you know, there's those little moments, you know, like during the creative process where some heads might butt a little bit, but everybody's egos are so in the right place that, you know, you might kind of feel possessive about something you've done, but you go, but no, let's figure it out, rather than, you know, stomping out the door. And we're having the best time with it. It's just a shame that with all the things going on with the group, that we managed to do it in a time where we can't, it's like running into a brick wall in terms of the pandemic. All the things we had planned and stuff are having to be completely rethought. The new album release, the documentary film being made, all these things are, it's like, but everybody's going through this. It's not, it's not a personal thing, but it's just sort of a drag that we finally get our moment together again. And now we're going, oh crap, now what? We'll see how it all goes.
I was listening to the first album and I just put on headphones and listened from start to finish. At the end of listening, I'm going to go right to the point. I realized why I believe you guys were and are continue to be so successful, because there was a lot of players and stuff in the 70s working on like kind of the softer kind of California sound, but they don't speak in the same way that you guys do. And I realized after listening to your solo records, it's because you're all massive R&B fans. Like it's seeping through. It's jazz and R&B tons. And even Danny's solo work, it sounds like he's listening to Jeff Beck at the time. It's like, it's a combination of the best stuff from the 60s with what was going on with like the jazz, funk and R&B of the 70s. Those solo records are phenomenal. Or whatever do you call them, solo albums, I suppose?
It was really funny when we got signed. I mean, the process was really interesting. When we originally started with James Taylor, it was Russ Cooch, me, and Carole King was the piano player in the band. And then James encouraged Carole to like do some songs at the beginning of the show because nobody knew who she was. People knew who Goffin and King were, but they had no idea. It was this like 20-something girl, because she was a teenager when she was writing all these hits. So all of a sudden she cuts Tapestry and we've got a band member with like the biggest record in the world. So we had to move on. And I was doing a project with Tom Jans and Mimi Farina at A&M. Mimi was Joan Baez's sister. And Craig Durgee was playing keyboard on it, and I just thought this guy would be the perfect guy to replace Carole in the band when she was going to be leaving. And when we were on the road with James opening for him, or playing with him, we weren't at that point. We weren't opening; we were still just his band. He wasn't, he would do his sound check and split. He wasn't that into it. And we would stay and jam and stuff. And finally, one day, somebody played us a tape and they said, you guys should check this out. And we said, that's great. Who's that? And he went, it was your sound check. I mean, we weren't really, we were just playing. We were having fun and spending our time. And Peter Asher got us a deal with Warner Brothers. The problem, I think Warner's, by our pedigree, thought they were going to be getting like the Eagles or Poco or, one of the Burrito Brothers, one of those kind of things. And all of a sudden we give them this kind of rock fusion instrumental album and they didn't know what to do with it. So they never really did anything. We ended up as kind of a cult band, even, when we were opening for James and Jackson. The diehard fans loved the band and like the label people just still never could figure out what we were about. And so it was an interesting period for us. I mean, we played constantly. We had a rehearsal place down on Oxnard near Sepulveda in the valley. And we went every night. We'd go there and play. Had an old Sony, one of those old boom boxes with the built-in condenser mics, and we recorded. I mean, there's got to be hundreds of cassettes of stuff that never got released.
Wow.
Tucked away. But we would sit and play constantly, and then we would listen to the stuff and disseminate it and create songs out of grooves and, things like that. But I love the guys. But the idea that 50 years later, practically, that a chunk of us are still together. I mean, Craig's still around. Craig lives right near me, but we chose to do a different direction doing the immediate family. And we're having a ball, though. It's great, man.
Fantastic. I really highly recommend everybody opens up their Spotify and goes and listens to the section. There's some prog on there as well. There's a couple of songs that are like 7 minutes long with 3 or 4 distinct kind of changes, which really speaks to me as well, growing up on that kind of stuff. Really amazing musicianship. And your right hand technique on a couple of tracks is phenomenal, especially for that period of time. You're playing like kind of, some Jaco kind of stuff before, any of us knew who Jaco was. Really great feel.
Thanks, man. I'm glad you like it. I mean, I go back and listen to it on occasion, and to me, it really still stands the test of time. It's kind of like going back and listening to Spectrum. And you go, that was 73, but man, it feels as fresh today as it felt back then. So, if it's good music, it stands the test of time.
Love instrumental music. It's, I find that I get to enjoy it on a completely different level to anything with vocals. And I might sound, because I can put myself into it. Yeah. I don't feel like somebody's telling me something. You know what I mean?
Absolutely right. Absolutely. That whole period of King Crimson, Brand X, I mean, all these groups, man. It's like, completely into all of those kind of bands. When I met James Taylor, I had never listened to soft rock or any of that. I was in a band that was kind of a cross between Hendrix and Zeppelin.
Sure.
So
yeah, I know, like you can hear it. That's why I think you guys had the edge. That's why I think even though you were, involved in that scene, you brought edge to it. And that's a huge thing. Knowing the prog then and leaping all over the place, because that's kind of what I do. I mean, there you go. You get to work with Phil Collins talking at Brand X. How did that come about?
I was hired, I think it was around 79 or 80 to work on a Lee Ritenour album. And Rit hired Phil also. And so when I went in the studio, I mean, I knew Phil from Genesis, but, that was it. And he knew me from like James Taylor and my stuff. And he was also a big fan of like all the TV shows, because I did all of Mike Post's TV shows like Rockford Files and the A-Team and all this. And he loved all that stuff. Yeah. And it was really fun playing together. And he asked me if I would do his first projects with him, face value and stuff. And at the time, I was committed to a James Taylor tour, and I couldn't. But I said, "Man, I'd love to do something with you down the line if it's possible." And he called me in '84 and said, "Are you free to come over?" And we did No Jacket in '84, and then started touring in '85. And Phil's absolutely one of my favorite drummers I've ever worked with. And I think one of the true blessings in my career is the players I've gotten to work with. Not even so much the artists, but the players. And, when one day I'm with JR, the next day I'm with Keltner, the next day I'm with, Zigaboo or, whatever. I mean, there's all these different guys, but Phil sits way up there as like just such a solid groove, great player. And it was just one of those things that, man, as soon as we started working, it was so comfortable and so good. And plus his writing sense, his pop sensibility and stuff is like just crazy. But I love Phil dearly. I don't know if there will be any future at this point. I know they had planned on a Genesis reunion later at the end of this year. But with the pandemic, it tentatively, I think, postponed till next year.
I presume you would play bass and Mike would play guitar?
No.
Full reunion?
Yeah, well, not full reunion because Gabriel wouldn't be there or Steve Hackett, but it would be, yeah, and Phil's son Nick would be the drummer, not Chester, on it. But it would be, Mike, Tony, and Phil and Daryl. But when they do Genesis, Mike and Daryl trade off the bass seat. I mean, I would do it in a second. If they called and said, "Look, we're both going to play guitar, play bass on it," but they've got their scene. But at this point, who knows what's going to happen? My year I was busy, solid through February of next year, and then when the pandemic hit, my book was like wiped clean. It was like I bought a new date book, and there's nothing in it. And there's and all these things that were canceled are either canceled, postponed. Nobody knows yet if they can, rebook. So we're in a netherworld right now. It's kind of this weird alternate universe in this industry of trying to just figure out what's going to happen in the future. And it's pretty scary.
Are you doing remote session work?
I've never recorded at home before. I've never had a studio. But some friends of mine called me, this friend of mine, Gussie Miller, and he called me up and he said, look, my friends of mine are doing a cover of Easy Lover. And would you like to play on it? And I said, well, look, when I do all my videos, I'm doing on an iPhone. I can't record with it. And he had a friend at SSL, and they sent me over an interface.
Great.
And, so I ended up just pulling up GarageBand and called Steve Postel and from the immediate family, and Steve walked me through, how to do it. And I ended up putting bass and filming it while I put it on for this Easy Lover cover. And then I stuck it up on my YouTube channel, and it's had like 170,000 views now and stuff. So I just had like Ian Pace just contacted me from Deep Purple about doing a couple of tracks. And
amazing.
So
Amazing.
I'm gonna do some. I'm not gonna get totally into it at this point, I don't think, just because there's so many things sort of going on right now that I don't want to spread myself so thin that I'm not really dedicating the time to the things that for me still are important. But I've got about 4 things where people have wanted me to put bass on it, and I'm waiting for files at this point. They're going to finish them up before they send me for my parts, and I'll see how it goes. If I get really comfortable with it, I might open the floodgates a little bit. But, when I look at everybody else's setups, I mean, the pandemic's been so weird because like if somebody's wanted me to do something, I would just call like John Gilliton or one of my friends, and I'd just go over to the house because they have great home studios, and we would just put the bass parts on there and then go eat. So,
yeah.
So I've never really kind of felt the drive to do anything. And I'm really not a writer. I've always loved being a part of projects and helping with on-site arranging and stuff while we're tracking. But I've just kind of, when I'm home, the idea of actually working at home never kind of appealed to me. I'd rather be doing yard work and playing with my dogs and stuff. Because there was enough work going on that when I was home, I wanted to be away from it. And suddenly now there is none of that. So I'm looking at it all, but at this point, I think the most critical thing is just people staying alive and healthy.
It's definitely a strange time for human history. I think we've obviously been through these things in the past, but we weren't as aware.
Yeah.
I think you bring a lot of joy to people, as you pointed out at the beginning, because you're playing back songs of artists that you've worked with. You're giving a twist and interpretation. And one of the joys I had when I worked with you on Dick's song was how many people do we have in a room? I think we had like 25 or something.
Yeah, it was pretty packed.
We had 3 keyboard players because we had Fred Mendel, or do we have 2? We had piano, Hammond. I think we had 2 keyboard players.
I think we had 2, yeah.
Like 4 acoustic guitar players sitting in a circle or something.
It was nuts, but it was so good, and plus it was for such a good cause.
It was
the St. Jude's Hospital and Dick. It just breaks my heart that he passed after that, because I know just talking to him, that he had issues that he was dealing with, but you sort of hope at that point when you think you're past them, that you've got a good stretch in front of you. So it was,
such a beautiful guy, wonderful player, incredible songwriter.
Yeah. No, he was definitely a force of nature.
At that point, he'd already had the stroke, but he still played with so much feel, even though he couldn't whiz around the fretboard like he used to in the 70s. He still had more feel than most people will ever have.
Hey, B.B. King, B.B. can, you can take shred monsters and stuff, and B.B. could bury them with one note.
Yep.
So, it just depends what you're looking for. I mean, I go through this a lot where I being an insomniac, I'm always like in the wee hours perusing YouTube and stuff. And every time I pull up like the Berkeley site or any of these things, and I look at all these bass players' videos, it's all about chops. It's very few people post anything about how to craft a song, a bass part for changes. I mean, all the guys that are sitting there, slapping away are basically sitting on an E and doing all kinds of stuff on it. And it's not to denigrate that. I mean, total admiration of the dedication and facility that they have, but it's like John Patitucci and I used to laugh about it, and we go, "Oh, those are NAMM show chops." That's a guy that's going to sit in a booth once a year and impress people for a minute with how fast he can play or how much facility he's got. But at a certain point, I would do like discussions during clinics, and I would say a whole note's really hard to play. There's a lot of options with it and stuff. And I'd go into a whole dissertation about a whole note, and guys would just be sitting there going, what? And I go, all that stuff, if your chops are up, you can get through a lot of that. But, just trying to find
I have a good memory of the Dick session with you. I think we ran the song like 4 or 5 times, and Dick's like, that's the take. And so you came in and we played back. And you were like, oh, I want to fix that bar. And so I'm like, which bar? And I go, and you had like one note of your whole bass line that you felt was on top was in front of the kick. And I was like, I'll just move it. And you went, no. and you went back in and punched the one note.
Yeah.
And I always remember going, yeah, I missed that.
Yeah, but it's kind of like doing a project, and like you'll play the first chorus and they go, oh, that's great. We'll just cut and paste it.
Yeah.
For the next chorus. And I go, no, the next chorus has to move. It has to develop. I mean, this stuff has to be organic. And, I always tell people, I said, look, let me leave getting the part I want. Now, the minute I walk out the door, if you want to start cutting and pasting, it's yours. You do whatever you want with it. But I want to leave feeling I've done the best job I can. And that's just, having, and especially coming from, the old tape days. I mean, you fix things. You weren't sitting there. You're thinking, I can just move this bar around and that stuff. It's like singers, man. You get in front of a mic. You're not going to, it wasn't people out there pitch correcting and comping 15 vocals to get a vocal out of it. Most of the singers I worked with get in front of a mic and they'd sing top to bottom, and it would be the vocal because they could sing. Yeah. So
I think, I'm sure you feel the same way. I think it's as much to do with producers as anything else. I think I feel like it's a responsibility for us that have been doing this for a while, that when we're working with younger artists, to help them get better.
Yeah, I
agree.
agree.
Means pushing them.
Yeah, and also, educating them, because so many, especially young artists, come from having only known this technology and knowing that you don't have to get better because you can fix the better through the technology, as compared to putting it down to where you don't need to fix it. And it's hard. Like when I'm in the studio with young artists, like the last thing I would ever do is say, you should have been there when it was analog. Yeah. Because you sound like grandpa, you sound like an old fart who's like talking about it. But if younger artists come to, when we're working and they said, what was it like with tape? Then I'm happy to talk about it, but they need to open the door to it. And, and certainly with the quality of, engineers and stuff, the digital technologies, there's some beautiful sounding records that are all cut that way. It's not like the early days when it really was a little sterile and mechanical. So, I don't, it sits on the lap to me, pretty much on the engineer's lap at the end of I always look at the engineer is if you got 5 guys in the room, you got 6 guys in the band, because the engineer is always a part of that, because without them, doesn't matter what you're playing in the room. There's so many times where I hear stuff in the phones and we're playing, and then you go listen to a playback and you go, what happened? But the other times where you walk in and you go, oh man, this sounds fantastic.
And from my perspective as an engineer, I'm only as good as you guys.
Yeah. So, it's a very symbiotic relationship, and the production seat is a whole other discussion. But that relationship between musicians and engineer is really, to me, what it's all about. If you can translate through the engineer what the band's doing and make it there, then you've got music. And I appreciate that, and I never hesitate to tell engineers when we're working, that sounds great, man, or can we tweak this? And 90% of engineers aren't on an ego trip about, hey man, that's my
sound.
Yeah. Yeah.
I do remember enjoying the fact that I barely compressed you. I think I may have had a compressor in there just in case, but I don't remember the needle moving. There's a handful of guys.
Yeah, I hate compression and I hate limitation. I always figured this is where it all is. And it was really funny. I was doing a clinic, a master class at Berkeley, and I was sitting with Steve Bailey, and he was just laughing because we had recorded something. And he said, I sat there watching the wave files, and he said, it's the most even wave files I've ever seen. He said, man, there was like no peaks and valleys unless it was a musical one that needed to be there. And, I don't think about that. I mean, I just play. I don't intellectualize my playing. I just do what I do and hope it's going to be good for the song.
Yeah, you've developed it over decades of playing. You can speak to this much better than I can, but obviously if you hit the string too hard, it frets out. There's less low end. There's something that makes your an accomplished player like yourself just gives us beautiful, big, fat tones, which means I have to compress less on when I'm mixing, less EQ, less everything. Yeah.
Well, it's also with great engineers. I mean, when it comes time to mix, I mean, it's really tragic when you see like a project's been handed off to somebody to mix it, and you see the poor mixer, like he's dealing with all this as compared to just nuances because it was recorded so poorly in the first place. And you really, there's so many projects that I've done where I've always asked, especially in the days of like, can you just run me a cassette or burn me a CD of the rough? And there's times where you go back and then you A/B that against the finished product and you go, man, they lost it.
Yep.
I mean, it was so magical when we were cutting it. And by the time they finished, dinking around with the stuff, the whole essence and the juices and all that stuff are somehow sucked out of them. And you kind of go, the people won't know because they don't have anything to compare it to. Mm-hmm. But as a player, you're privy to that early stage of it when it really was something special.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think there was a sort of a period where record companies were in control, which was sort of that late 90s to mid 2000s, when the CD sales were going crazy. And they just felt like everything had to go to X, Y, and Z person to mix it. And going back to some of those records, it's just horrible.
Well, it's horrible because, and also those engineers, the mixing engineers, weren't there for the track. They don't know the vibe that went on. And I always thought, why not just let the guy who recorded it mix it? I just, but it was all that thing like, well, this guy just had a huge hit record with like Counting Crows or somebody like that. And so they want that vibe. They want that thing, but it's a different record. It's like, I've never quite gotten all that stuff, but that's the politics. So, it's like there's always that thing between there's music and there's music business. And sometimes they are diametrically opposed. I've heard record executives when they didn't know they were being heard talking about what a nuisance musicians can be.
What was the Frank Zappa quote? Because he was talking about in the late 60s when he started, how record company executives were better because they didn't understand. They were just like 60-year-old guys in suits that were just looking at all these 20-year-old kids. He said the problem is when the 20-year-old kids became the record executives and then started thinking that they knew best. It's really a shame. Or some of the guys who learned just enough catchphrases to be a nuisance in the studio, and you go, I would always tell people, I say, to me, my favorite record producers, they're smart enough to hire the right guys, and then they can tell when everybody's hungry, so they order lunch and put their plastic down. Yep.
Done. Let everybody work, but sometimes they come in and they want to get involved, and they're making, fine, whatever, but they're making that's why I put the producer switch on my bass. That doesn't do anything. As long as somebody sees you flip the switch, they'll hear something different, even though it has no wires or anything going to it.
I remember the first time I worked with Dan, who's actually my neighbor, Dan Rothschild, as a producer. The first time I was producing a track, and everybody was just kind of lethargic. And I was like, hey, I think let's order some lunch. And Dan stops and looks at me and goes, good production.
It's so true, though. I mean, a really good producer will be able to read the room and know, man, it's time to let's take a breather here. Let's get everybody some. The only thing you hope is that you're not cutting tracks in a way where, like, the most intense up-tempo track is going to be the one you cut after lunch.
Yeah, exactly.
Go for a ballad just to get everybody working, and after the wheels have been greased. But it's a funny thing, I mean, the thing I love so much about music is the fact that it'd be one thing if you were working like a General Motors and putting on the same part every day. But the fact that even though we're making music all the time, every experience is unique and different, and it can even be the same bunch of people, but just biologically, you're whatever that day, how you woke up, what your drive was like to get to the studio, that can all affect the outcome of the music. And so I find it fascinating, and I never have tired of it. I mean, after this many years, that phone rings, man, I'm still excited about going to work and seeing who's on the date and what kind of music we're playing. Because generally I don't know anything until I get to the studio. I have no idea if I'm doing reggae, funk, country or anything. It's not until the artist arrives or there's a demo or something that you know what you're doing.
It's a good thing to talk about. I get approached by a lot of young musicians and they want to be session players, and they're always technically very gifted. Like we were talking about, they may have been schooled by really great people, gone to great schools. And the thing I always try to tell them is that when working with guys like yourself, you've worked with every single singer-songwriter you can imagine ever, of all different genres. And when you hear something for the first time, like you're talking about, you go into a studio, you bring that massive amount of acquired knowledge. And the best session players in the world sound like they've been playing in the band for the last 10 years on the road. And that's a really hard thing to try and tell young players, because young players think it's all about, well, Lee just basically went boom, 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 boom. I could do that. It's like, yes, but would you? Would you do that? You can do it, but would you?
Yeah. I mean, there's a lot of people that impose themselves on songs. So much of it is just listening and finding, what the song wants from you, not what you want to put in the song as much. And if a song requires like if it's suddenly like a Tower of Power thing, like a Rocco part, if you've got the chops to do it, it's great, man. I love doing something like that. But if it's suddenly like a Reba McEntire song, that's a lamenting ballad, that's mostly whole notes and half notes, I'm good with that too, because that's what the song wants. It's not, I'm not going to leave that day going, now they don't think much of me because I didn't show off my chops. I remember Hal Blaine told me a story. I tell it a lot, but he went down to San Diego to do a gig, and there was a young bass player on the gig, and the guy just whipped out everything he had, man. He was like roaring, and when it was all through, he kind of came all puffed up to Hal and said, "So, man, what do you think?" And Hal looked at him and said, "I think we need a bass player." It's like, bam, flaccid immediately. But, but there is that element when you're young, you're really trying to, whip it all out and show everybody what you got. But as time goes on, you realize, it's really the song that I'm here for. It's not for me. It's not for anything else. It's really for that song. And so much of that does come with, experience and also just having, I was fortunate that the household I grew up in, my folks, even though it wasn't a musician's household, it was a musical household. So my parents were incredibly eclectic in their record collections and stuff. So I was listening to classical and Martin Denny and, all kinds of, different varieties of music. So when I kind of started in this, I had an appreciation for everything. I wasn't like, I get guys that write to me all the time that say, man, well, I'm a metal guy. And all that. And I go, well, but the thing that I love is when somebody says, like, I'm a metal guy, but I had no idea about Neil Sedaka, Wow. And they're discovering things. And even if it's not going to change what they play, it's changing their ear. And they might bring something different to their metal by just listening to another kind of music.
Oh, I agree. I feel like if there's one thing in current music that I feel is missing, is that crossover that we used to have so in such abundance.
Yeah, yeah. It's tough. I mean, things have changed, morphed in so many ways into other things that you just try to hold on to the values that you really found so appealing when you started your career, and
Yep.
And then you embrace things. I always just tell people, man, I just do not want to be an old fart. I'm as excited now at 73 as I was at 23 when we were starting.
I agree. I don't want to be the wagging finger. I talk about it a lot. I watch a lot of videos that I understand they're trying to help, but reinforcing that John Bonham was the world's greatest drummer in every video is a little exhausting. It just comes across when you're like 21 years old, like, don't even bother, kid. It's all been done. That's what I love about what you're doing, is like you have no sort of pretensions. I think maybe it's a blessing of being a phenomenal player. And thank you for bringing up Rocco Prestia as well, because I heard a lot of Rocco's playing in the section stuff. But I think one of the things is the fact that makes your channel so great and what you do so great is that you don't come across like that at all. It's like a refreshing take, not the kids of today.
yeah, because there's phenomenal young musicians. Like, people say, what's the future like in music? I go, it's in great hands.
Yeah,
I mean, there are some fantastic young artists out there, and my concern is really the business. And so many projects that I work on now, the phone call you get after you finish the project is like from a manager going, "Any ideas what we can do with this?" Because like in the old days, you had the labels, you knew you were going to kind of get screwed by them. I mean, that was the nature of the beast. But they had that machine in place that got you airplay, that got promotion and all that stuff going on. That now so many projects that I work on are indie projects. Like the family meets some guy who's made money in Silicon Valley and always dreamed about being part of the music business, and puts up some money to get in the studio, but they don't know what to do with the thing after they finished it. And that's really the difficulty. The talent is out there, man. There's some monster, and then you get into that, like seeing like the 8-year-olds that are like evidence that aliens have fathered kids on this planet. I mean, you just go, are you kidding me? Give me a break. But like, it's an adventure every day. You just don't know. The thing I like is you don't know what's around the corner every day. It's the uncertainty. It's like that musician's paranoia. The minute your last gig ends and there's nothing in front of you, you think, I'm never going to get called again. It's over. I'm done. And then the phone rings. So I mean, but you never. It's really hard to get away from that mentality, because you were, as a kid, like growing up, like the families and all that generally were always going, well, yeah, he's playing now, but at some point he's going to get serious and maybe get a law degree or open up a tire shop or something. But musicians were always looked at as like these vagabonds.
Yeah, my dad always used to say, "Stop banging on that bleeding banjo." Lee, thank you ever so much. No, I really appreciate your time.
I'm so sorry about last week when everything got all we were going to and everything got.
I'm sorry today we were late because we had our internet go down. God bless it. But I bet you if I booked you for a session for 11, you'd be there at 10:30. Oh,
absolutely. The day before. It was really funny. There's a gal named Vicki Abelson who does like this stream every day on her thing. And I screwed up, and this was before the pandemic, and she does it out of her house, and it's just right up near La Cabanita, where I go to get Mexican food up in Montrose. And I go up, and I walk up, and there's a guy coming up the stairs too. It's in a condo, and we're both standing at the door. And I said, "Oh, I'm going here too." And I knock on the door, and she opens the door, and she looks at him, and she looks at me. She looks at me and goes, "What are you doing here?" I said, "Well, we're doing our thing." She goes, "Oh, you're next week." And she was interviewing this other guy doing her thing with him, and he was a TV writer. And I just said, "Well, Well, actually, I was just checking to make sure I had the right directions, and then I scurried away. So, occasionally, but usually, like you said, 10:30. That's another one of the things I talk about if I do a clinic or something. It's like that's really the ethic of studio work or any kind of work like that. Is if it's an 11 o'clock downbeat, you're not pulling in the parking lot at 11. You're in your seat. You've tuned. You're ready to go. If there's charts, you've rifled through them to see if there's anything that you really need to give a little heads up to beforehand. The artist could show up 2 hours late. That's their prerogative. But you as hired help, be professional about this. It is a profession, even though it's called playing.
I want to add that the session that you and I did, the St. Jude's one, is available for a download. And we have been giving all of the money for the sales of it to St. Jude's. And it has done really, really well. In fact, St. Jude's sent us a plaque, 2020 Certificate of Appreciation and Recognition of Outstanding Support in Helping St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital to keep its promise to children and families battling cancer and other deadly diseases.
That's
so for
great.
Anybody that wants to download the multi-tracks, all of the money goes to St. Jude's.
Dick was
a wonderful guy, and
yeah.
No, glad I got to meet you out of that.
Yeah, it's great, and I've been having fun. I'm kicked off of. I'm still in blockage time on Facebook again. I got I think another 2 weeks to go before I'm back on. But the thing is, I always enjoy whenever I see any of your stuff on there and stuff you're doing. It's always really a treat, man. I hope we can sort out some kind of stuff to do.
Oh yeah,
it'd be really fun to do it. But,
yeah, I'm a huge fan of Nico. So if there's something we could do, like all of that, and I can help support that and make it happen and facilitate it, that'd be amazing. Be great. Well, whatever we can do.
Yeah, we'll keep in touch on all that stuff, and I'll keep you posted what we're up to and stuff. And then I'm going to go see if I can find another version of Her Town too that I can get up. But it's so funny. Like when they screw me out of these things, then I do a video explaining what's going on. I say I'm pissed, and like the Her Town 2 might get like 17,000 views, and then the one that says I'm really pissed suddenly gets like 80,000. It's like it's all so screwy. I just go, man, this is nuts. But I'm enjoying my YouTube. I'm really having fun.
Well, you're doing an amazing job. There's going to be a link underneath, but I'm sure pretty much everybody that watches my show already watches yours as well.
Anytime you want to yak, just give me a shout and I'm happy to come back.
Amazing. I really appreciate it.
Okay, man. Well, Warren, man, it's always a treat to see you here, and thanks for inviting me over to play in your yard.
Thank you, just the same. And I'm going to ask a version of this Louise question. Can I read it out specifically so I don't mess up Louise's question? We have a mutual friend in Louise Goffin, and I said to her I was going to be interviewing you, and I said, what would be the one question you'd want to ask Lee? And she said, ask him the secret of his long and happy marriage to Maureen. They're a great success story.
Yeah, I love Louise. I mean, I've known Louise since she was a little squirt, and she's, grown into such a talented, beautiful woman. She's great. Maureen and we're going to be celebrating our 50th anniversary in December. And
wow.
we met back. I knew her before I knew James Taylor. We met back in college. I think it's just, appreciating each other, for who we are. And neither of us, kind of like a record hit, you don't come in and impose yourself on it. You figure out what's needed by that song or by that relationship. And that's kind of what you go for. And of course, I mean, it has its ups and downs and all that. There's, an element of it that was difficult, like on long tours and stuff where you're gone for months and months on end. And we've never had kids. So, it was pretty much her and the dogs and stuff. But she's got her own life too. I mean, not working, but I think the pandemic, this quarantine has been much harder on her than it has been on me, because she's very, very social, has her girlfriends, and, they go out to the movies and out to lunch and all that stuff shut down. So it's been harder, where I'm kind of like, this is, other than working, I'm digging being, just here and doing what I do. But I think a lot of patience and understanding and, knowing everything's not going to always be smooth, but you figure out how to smooth out when it isn't stuff. But that's great. Louise threw that one out there. She's such a sweetheart.
She is a real sweetheart. I've known her since late 80s. I recorded her one of my first like proper recordings.
Oh, cool.
I can't remember, I was 20 or 21 or something.
That's great. Yeah, I mean, back when, when we started, in 70, I mean, she was just, she and her sister were both these like little kids back then, and I knew Jerry really well and stuff. And just to, especially with her, she's more visible than her sister in terms of, music and all that. And she's just delightful. And the apple did not fall far from the tree with the family. So many of them are like that. I mean, that's like Phil's son playing drums with us. I mean, Nicholas was a really a solid drummer at 4, and he'd be out on the road with us. And when we started this last tour, he was 16 years old, and he pretty much auditioned for the gig. It wasn't like, oh, it's Phil's son, of course he's going to be out there. He really, and during the 2 years we were on the road, 2 years plus, he evolved, and he's hungry to get better. I mean, it was like every day we were all like mentors with him, and he wanted information. He was like a sponge, just eating it all up, and you'd see it in his playing and stuff. So it's cool. Or Nate Kunkel. I mean, I know Nate since he was born, and when Russ's kid, and just to become like the great engineer and everything that he became. Wonderful. It's great. I love it. I think it's great. But Louise is a prime example of that to me.
Such a sweetheart. Thank you ever so much.
My pleasure.
It's been absolutely amazing. There's going to be a link down below to Lee's channel. I'm sure you're already following it, but if you aren't, please follow it. There's also be a link to the course we were talking about, where all of the proceeds go to St. Jude's. And I really appreciate all your time. Thank you, my friend.
Bye-bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.